We're going to continue in Chapter 4 of Price Analysis, a fundamental approach to the study of commodity prices, and we're going to continue with another hedging example. We're going to consider a flour mill whose business is buying wheat in the cash market and grinding it into flour. This is a little bit different than the farmer example we had before because the farmer was selling in the cash market, so therefore his hedging activity should be selling in the futures market. The flour mill is, of course, buying in the cash market. That means the hedge that they place should be buying in the futures market. Another thing that makes this more complicated than the farmer example is that the flour mill needs to hedge price risk at multiple points in time. So they're running their business year-round, and they're going to make purchases of wheat. For example, let's just say they purchase wheat at the first of every month. That means that they need to hedge with futures contracts to correspond with each of those monthly purchases in the cash market. Now, another thing that we know is there are 5 futures contract expirations in the wheat market: March, May, July, September, and December. And so if we want to hedge, for example, the purchases that we make in the cash market in January and February, there's no January and February futures market. So the flour mill is going to have to use the next to expire futures contract to hedge that price risk, and of course that would be the March futures contract. Now suppose that on December 1st, 2015, the farmer takes a look at the forward futures curve and likes what they see for those forward prices. So they decide, okay, we really want to lock in our purchases for the next 6 months because those prices look pretty good. So that means they know they're going to make these purchases in the cash market in January, February, March, April, May, and June. First 6 months worth of purchases. And to hedge it, they're going to have to match it with the appropriate number of futures. So in January, that's going to take 10 of the March contract, the next to expire. February is also going to take another 10 of the March contract. Same for the purchase in March. And in April, the March contract has gone off the board, so they're going to have to skip down to May. And that's also going to be 10 contracts. And they can use the May contract to hedge the May purchase. And June, of course, May will have gone off the board by then, so they're going to have to skip ahead to the July contract to hedge that. So now you can see down here, we have this column for action, and that's saying exactly that. If we want to lock in prices on December 1st, we're going to have to buy 30 of the March. You can see that here, 30 March. And we're going to buy 20 of the May, that's these two. And we're going to have to buy 10 of the July, that's these. Now I've scrolled down a little bit more to reveal some later dates on this table. And one thing that I want to mention before we get going too far is that in this example we're going to assume that the basis stays constant at 1/4 cent under the nearby futures contract. And you'll see that here. 1/4 cent under, 1/4 cent under, 1/4 cent under. That way we don't confuse variation in the basis for what's happening to this flour mill's ability to lock in prices based on the futures levels that they see. So just like the farmer hedging his cash sales with futures and being still exposed to basis risk after doing that, the flour mill will also be exposed to basis risk by hedging their purchases in the futures market, but we're going to take that out of it so that we can highlight the other concepts here. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens on January 1st. So they hedged on December 1st, and January 1st comes around and they need to make their first purchase in the cash market that they had planned for. So that's why here in the action column we have a buy 50,000 in the spot market. And it says that we are also going to sell 10 of the March. And that's because whenever you make your action in the cash market, you have to lift the hedge from the futures market. So 50,000 purchase in the cash market is equivalent to 10 futures contracts. So we're going to sell 10 of our March contracts, and that means out of the original 30 March contracts, we're only long 20 now. Now the other thing that we need to do is verify and make sure that we're actually getting the net price we expected to get. So without any variation in the basis, the price that we expect to get is that cash price that we saw on December 1st. And if we do the work, we see that we are going to indeed get that. So to get our net price paid, we're always going to take the spot price at the cash sale date, and that's going to be a negative actually, because in this example we're purchasing wheat, so we'll denote purchases in the cash market with a minus sign. So minus the spot at cash sale date plus futures profit or loss. Okay, and you see that's exactly what we get, right? So the spot price is $4.79, so I'm going to get minus $4.79, that's my minus the spot price, plus my futures gain or loss is always going to be the sell price minus the buy price. Now of course, since it was a hedge, I bought my contracts on December 1st for $4.70 and I sold them for $4.79. So the $4.79 should get the plus and the $4.70 should get the minus. And that's why we have this in this column here. And if you do that arithmetic, you get exactly back $469.75. Alright, so let's skip down a little bit. I want to see what happens when we get into something that happens after the March expiration. So you can work through that same logic on your own to verify the February and the March columns. But once we get to April, remember in the previous month we lifted our final hedge with the March contract, and so now when we do our cash purchase on April 1st, we'll be lifting 10 of our May contracts. And that's why this 20 May goes down to 10 May. On April 1st, we lift 10 of those contracts. Alright, so similar logic here. We've lifted 10 of the May contracts, and I want to walk through how we get this net price paid in this example. So just like before, the net price paid is going to be minus the spot price. So that's my $477.75 that I see, plus the gain in the futures market. We are selling one of the May contracts, so I should be having my sell price be $478.00 minus, and this was purchased back on December 1st for that price, $476.5. Now if you do that calculation, you get $476.25. which is not $469.75. Now we mentioned that when the mill places their hedge on December 1st, they should be locking in essentially this spot price that they see minus any basis risk, but we took out basis risk. So what happened? Why is this number not equal to $469.75? Well, what happened is that it is true that they should see that they should get the spot price that they saw on December 1st, but they are going to have to pay for basically storage fees that stockholders are incurring in the market. And if you take a look at this number we got, $476.25, that is equal to 1/4 cent under the May futures contract. And that is exactly what we would expect. Actually, because we have rolled through time, and you would expect stockholders to be earning returns to storage in a typical market. And when we hedge, what we're doing is we're basically locking in that we have to pay exactly this return to storage, or a difference of 6.5 cents. And that's exactly what we've ended up having to do. So you see that we get this number, 476.25, with our purchases in April and May. And then when the May contract goes off the board, we start hedging with the July futures contract, and that price is going to correspond to the July price that we saw on December 1st, 2015. So 1/4 cent below the July futures contract as of December 1st. That concludes our example of a flour mill hedging. The only thing that we have left to talk about in Chapter 4 is the importance of having a line of credit if you're going to hedge with futures markets. Now remember, when you're using futures contracts to hedge, the reason it reduces price risk or price variance is because when your position in the cash market is making money, then your position in the futures market is losing money, and vice versa. So when your position in the futures market is losing money, that means your brokerage account is going to be marked to market every day, and you're going to see the balance in your brokerage account going down and down and down when your futures position is losing and losing and losing. Now, on net, when you take your cash plus your futures, you haven't lost that much of anything because you're gaining in the cash market when you're losing in the futures market. But you still have to have the cash to deposit into your futures brokerage account in order to keep open those futures hedges. And if your account balance falls below the margin requirement, you're going to get what's called a margin call. And if you don't wire them money basically immediately, then you'll be forced to close your position. Then you won't be hedged anymore, and the whole exercise will be for naught. So what you have to do is you have to have a relationship with a banker who understands the way hedging works and is willing to basically give you a line of credit, and they'll secure it with your cash grain for sure. And then it's a pretty safe loan for them to make, but it's just basically a cash flow issue for you. Whatever money they need to lend you to put into your margin account, if the price is changing and your position in the cash market is improving, then as soon as you either do your buy or your sell in the cash market, whichever one it is, then you should be able to more than be able to compensate for the line of credit that you had to take out. But it is something that you need to be aware of. So that concludes Chapter 4. I'll look forward to talking to you guys next time.